A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to some more films I should have talked about years ago. And this is one of those examples that I feel like with many franchises out there that go off in their own tangent with a spin-off film or series of any sorts, this is probably going to be no different than many others. Because, well, if you want to go back all the way to the year 2005, with the DreamWorks film called Madagascar, which got a sequel a few years later with Madagascar Escape to Africa, and then Madagascar 3, Europe's Most Wanted in 2012. But then 2 years later in 2014, there came a spin-off film called The Penguins of Madagascar. It is in fact based off of a group of penguins that are known to appear in the films themselves, along with many other tangents that have appeared. And these penguins, I tell you, they were pretty amazing when they accompanied the animals on their many adventures throughout the world. Madagascar, Africa, and Europe, and all that good stuff. But in this particular instance, I will say that for a spin-off of any sorts, a film that focuses more on the penguin side of the franchise itself, it actually does give us quite a unique look. Considering that the Penguins of Madagascar have already gotten a lot of treatment outside of the original franchise itself, the original film series itself had the Penguins of Madagascar pretty much accompanying the four animals, Mel, Alex, and the others pretty much, throughout their various adventures in the world. They would offer help sometimes and also give us a bit of comedic relief. It sort of gave us that classic spy cliche, like with many franchises like James Bond and Mission Impossible. But within this context, it almost made sense that Penguins of Madagascar would actually have to have their own sort of spin-off film, or something else entirely. But in 2014, that's exactly what happens. The Penguins of Madagascar, starring Skipper and Private and the others, going up against, well, the villain, whom in this film is played by John Malkovich. But you also got yourself many of the other characters. Some are recurring and some end up making cameo appearances here and there. Of course, I really do have to talk a little bit about the film itself, because let's just say that first of all, well, I'm going to have to read through a little bit of like a script part on here because it was a bit difficult for me to remember at the time. Basically speaking, you basically have all four of the original Penguins of Madagascar, Skipper, Rico, Private, Kowalski, all going up against the charming villain. In this film, again, it's played by John Malkovich. But you basically have the four penguins themselves, who are voiced by Tom McGrath, Christopher Knight, Chris Miller, and John DiMaggio, whom you might remember as Jake from Adventure Time or as Bender from Futurama. But in this case, we also do have a few other characters. Classified, who is a giant wolf, played by Benedict Cumberbatch. And then, of course, you also have the recurring, well, not sure if it's a squirrel or something, but you have Mort, again, played by Andy Richter, just like in the movies. But for the most part, you can at least say that this film actually takes quite a different approach, because giving us that sort of adventure that the Penguins of Madagascar typically have, yeah, basically just looking at this thing is actually helping. I might need my own teleprompter of some sorts, just to at least help out with this. But anyways, just to describe the plot itself, again, I have to look at my thing itself. The Penguins of Madagascar, they join forces with a cheap undercover organization, which is called the North Wind. And then, of course, you have yourself Classified, who ends up joining forces with the Penguins to help them take on the charming villain. Yeah, that's quite a name for a villain. Charming villain out there. But I will say that, for the most part, this film actually does not do a whole lot to entertain us for the most part. I mean, I guess that's probably a bit of a surprising factor. I'm one of those guys, though, who seeks this kind of stuff on a daily basis. So I find nothing wrong with this film at all. I mean, the animation style in this one is certainly appropriate given the time that it was released in, and given how long it had been since the first Madagascar came out. Knowing that I was 6 years old at the time the first Madagascar film came out in theaters, and I saw it in theaters, it was certainly one of many films that I watched in theaters way back in the day. It was one of the first, I tell you that, first off. But it's also important to note that, well, there's probably a lot of other things that I could potentially talk about, but I don't necessarily want to spoil a lot of details to people out there, or kind of offer up a little disservice, if you don't mind. So I might as well just keep it to myself for now. But in terms of giving this a score, based on what I've seen so far, knowing that I'm a seeker, a guy who regularly enjoys crap of all sorts, I might as well go ahead and give it a 7.6 out of 10. 7.6. It's got a nice cast into it, kind of like with what the movies basically offered us, with certain actors like Chris Rock and Ben Stiller as the original four animals of the films themselves. But in this case, we do have some other well-known actors who were able to offer up their talents to give us something a little bit different in contrast to the Madagascar movies themselves. Because the original trilogy has not necessarily had as high of popularity as they used to, especially with all these newer DreamWorks films. Because man, aren't they too good for our tastes. But still, given all the nostalgia that I still regularly experience after all these years, it still is, certainly, without a doubt, quite a great franchise nonetheless. So, you know what? I guess Penguins of Madagascar having their own tangent, their own spin-off film, was actually a nice idea. It's still good to know that it actually exists. Kind of like with how we had Alien vs. Predator, Freddy vs. Jason, and all other sorts of great ideas put together into feature films for us to see, pretty much. So again, it's great that these kinds of films exist nowadays, but yet they don't necessarily do as well as we originally hoped that they would. So, 7.6 for the Penguins of Madagascar film. End of story. But I will be talking about a lot of other films, though, in the future, so do be sure to stick around for those things. And if you want to see more go down on my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.